Well, what's going on this week? You say, well, Bob, you know what's really going on? We got the Olympic Games going on in Sochi. Down there, it's warmer there. People keep telling us over there that it's warmer there than it is back in the United States. So what that's supposed to mean, I don't know. Well, there you have the Olympic rings. When the Olympics were restarted as an effort to get nations to agree on something, the designer of the logo decided to take a color from each of the nations that were participating, and it seemed that these 5 colors were in common on their flags. So there we have those colors because they were the original revival of the Olympic, the nation's flag. I'm sure it'd be much different today, but I guess they've decided not to revise it. Olympics has a long history. You know, if you watch the parade of nations coming in, the Greeks come in first. You say, well, gee, that's not exact. But it's because they started the whole thing. You know, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Way back. In fact, there were not only games at Olympus, but there were games all over Greece. And there were the Isthmian games, and there were the games that Dorics had, and the games that the Athenians had, and all kinds of games. They were very important. And there was even a publicist at that time, a poet by the name of Pindar, P-I-N-D-A-R. You may have read him, I'm sure. If not, I wouldn't blame you. It's rather difficult. I had a course in Pindar in which we had to translate from his original. He wrote in Doric Greek, and Doric Greek is a lot like Scottish English. If you ever tried to read Robert Burns, you know what I'm talking about. Robert Burns, what some gift he gives to see ourselves as others see us, and so forth. Pretty good point, though, you must admit. But anyway, Pindar, in his first Olympiad, it's an ode, said, "Never look for any star shining brighter in the eternal heavens than the sun, nor any glory of the games greater than Olympus." Wow, the Greeks loved that stuff. They recited it. Didn't have much TV, but they had rhapsodes, and people would show up, and they'd sing these things, these Pindarianos. He's a very popular guy. He has odes about boxers and runners. But meanwhile, in Athens, there was a guy named Isocrates, not to be confused with Socrates, the teacher of Plato, but another Athenian named Isocrates, who was an Athenian educator, and he wrote a little criticism about the games. And in the criticism he says, "I've always been amazed at the national assemblies that think the reward for the prowess of men's bodies is so important that they should receive monetary rewards when anyone who toils in the private good for the public welfare receives absolutely no help at all, when in all reason they should have done the latter rather than the former. For if all the athletes in the world were tomorrow twice as strong as they are today, the rest of the world would be no better off. But let a single person attain to wisdom, then every individual can benefit who will accept his idea." You know, it's not a bad saying, right? That's, if you want to read it, that's found in the little speech called the Panegyricus by Isocrates of Athens, and I think it's right, because if every athlete in the world could skate twice as fast tomorrow as they did today, and by the way, U.S. skating team not doing too well, have you noticed they said it might be the clothes they're wearing? Well, it's got 0 and 18, that's not too good a start, right? So it's probably the clothes. But you ever notice you got to find an excuse if you're not doing well, you know. It's a coach's fault, fire him. All right. I like it. It's like the manager of the football team, or the coach or whatever he is, he gets fired if the players aren't motivated. Well, so you say, what has this got to do with the book of James? Well, actually very little. Except, I suppose, it's sort of contemporary in time, you know, the Olympic Games, and it's all going on. And at the same time, you know, I have this tremendous interest in the games and sports. So what we still do today, it's amazing, isn't it? Now, James would probably take a little bit of a take on it like Isocrates would do, and he would say, well, yeah, that's okay, but there's a lot of good that needs to be accomplished that Christians can be doing if they can get so distracted by the world. And so maybe some of these people that are training have been distracted by other things. And every athlete I hear that wins a gold medal always says, I have dedicated my life and I've spent years getting ready for this moment. I don't think anybody just shows up, you know. Here I am, ready to take this incredible run down the mountainside in these skis and go 90 miles an hour in a luge. Those people are weird, by the way. No, they spend years and years doing this. And while you may question that dedication and say, why in the world would you spend 4 years going down a hill on a sled with some other guy? Well, there may be reasons. We don't know. But they're all dedicated. And I think James would agree with that. He would say, yeah, the problem is that we've got a great cause to be dedicated to, but we're not always there. We're sort of making it up on our own. So we ended up with this thought, that James had last time, and I'll just go back to it for a moment. People who should be including God in their plans, but because of their own personal arrogance, leave God out. And that disturbs James because he knows that the Lord could really help us focus so much on what we're doing, and we could do it so much better if we include him in all of our lives. And then he ends up with this saying, and what I want to reflect on before I look at that saying is that I don't think any of this is meant to make us uncertain, but just, to keep God in our lives. So, James then points to something here very important. And you've seen this a lot. I know you've heard this quoted in sermons, right? To the one who knows to do what is right and doesn't do it, to him it is sin. And that's been taken as a kind of a free-floating scripture. It's been extracted and applied to virtually everything. Well, if you know, you shouldn't. And I've heard it in debates and all. I don't think James meant for any of that to happen. I think he's saying, if you know that including the Lord in your life is the most important priority, then it's wrong for you not to. That's all. It's just a kind of a prophetic saying. It doesn't have anything to do with pianos or anything, in my opinion. Well, pianos came up more than once today, didn't they? But organs or whatever you want to talk about. Now, the thing is, why do we do that? Well, we do that because these are kind of shortcuts we can take, you see, to sort of confront people with. But James is talking about something much deeper, and that is this person who has their life completely dedicated to God and completely in the environment of God. But there's something that James is concerned about in the next section that kind of grows out of that. We know we ought to treat our fellow man better than we do. We know we need to be conscious of the needs of our fellow man, but yet we often find ourselves on the exploitative side rather than the helping side. And so James and I are going to enter into a section where a lot of his disgust, anger, prophetic insights into people who exploit other people. And why do people exploit other people? Well, I think there's kind of one word that explains it. I may be wrong. Greed. Greed. And like Montgomery Burns here, from The Simpsons, he's the epitome of greed in that strip. Pretty well is the spokesperson for it. Greed is that desire that your security in life depends on you having power and you having finances and you having money and you having things other people don't have, and that those things are so necessary for your security that you do almost anything and justify anything and rationalize anything to have that. And that is so inimical to the way of God that now James has to spend a little bit of time talking about it. It's not a pleasant thing to talk about. I guess we'd like to even think that it doesn't exist. It's sort of like this. Take a stare at this for a moment. And whatever you do, don't think of chocolate, okay? And that's like the old game. Elephant, don't think of an elephant, How could you help it? Greed. So it's not a pleasant thought, because we don't want to believe that we're that way in any way at all, that we share any of these characteristics. And yet, it's something to look at, James tells us. So where's a good place to start here? Well, why don't we start with this scripture, which is, to me, one of the most telling insights into the nature of greed that's in chapter 5. Now, first I'm going to present my translation. And I'm not saying it's all that good, but I tried to catch a little bit of the flavor. And then to show you a really, really good translation, I'm going to put something up by J.B. Phillips. So let's take a look at how this starts off. Now, it seems to me he's saying, okay, come and gather around all you wealthy people. Let's talk. What I want you to do is weep and wail over your approaching misery. And you may feel like, this is really inappropriate, Your riches have rotted, and moths have eaten up your fancy clothing. Rusted is your gold and silver, and their leaking corrosion has kind of become a poison. And it's eating away at your flesh as a firewood. Now, this is what you've actually put away. Now, what he means is that they think they have put away security for themselves in their old age. They have put away everything that's going to make sure everything is great for them. But what they really put away is just a day of vengeance with God. And this is really hard to talk about, you see, and particularly to a class that has a lot of power. And this continues my translation. Look, the wages you defrauded, now here's kind of a figure of speech, are crying out. And not only are these guys greedy and think they can store up in the future and make their lives secure, but they're also crooks. Now, James is not attacking the wealthy per se at all. Nor Jesus doesn't, the Bible doesn't particularly at all. It's considered to be a blessing. And those that are good-hearted, wealthy people do tons of good. He's talking about these self-centered, control freak type people who will do anything to be in power. But it really offends the Lord greatly. And so he says, the Lord Sabaoth, which should be translated, the Lord of the armies of heaven, or the Lord of hosts is the old translation. You've lived self-indulgent, luxurious life, fattened yourself up for the day of slaughter, and even have entered into judicial murders. Now that reminds us, of course, of the scene from the Hebrew Scriptures about Naboth the Jezreelite and Ahab. And King Ahab had enough training to know it wasn't really right for him to take this vineyard that he coveted with all his heart. Jezebel had no problem with it. Ahab knew enough about God to know it really wasn't right for him to do it, so he pouts. And you may say, well, men don't pout. Well, men do pout, and they do it very well. They're good at it. And it gets the wife's attention after a while. And so is something wrong? Well, Jezebel says, and she must have been a caring woman in many ways, I suppose. Something wrong, honey? Yeah, it's a little goofy guy down here, Naboth. He's nothing but a Jezreelite, and he owns this little vineyard, and I love this little vineyard. It's like the best vineyard you ever saw in your life, but he won't sell it to me. He won't sell it to me. Jezebel, hey, no problem. You're the king, aren't you? Just get some false witnesses, pay him a few shekels, and testify that he said something he shouldn't have said, and we'll get him stoned and killed, and no problem. So they do it. Bang. And Ahab's down there admiring the field, and the prophet shows up. Don't they always? So you have killed, you have gained. And Ahab, hears some really bad news, because in the act of doing that, he throws himself into that complete godless background of Jezebel and that worship of riches and acquisition and power that he could have avoided if he'd stayed with the God of Israel, but no. And so this is a famous case. This happens. Judicial murders. Even Jesus' murder was a judicial murder. Many times those who are in power will do this. Years and years ago, I met a guy that you probably know, used to live here. His name, he owned some restaurants in town where he got biscuits and stuff. Ireland, that's it. What's Wayne something? Anybody remember that name? What's his name? Oh, that's the guy, yeah. He said, today, he says, in Nashville, we live by the golden rule. Them that has the gold makes the rules. So it's kind of that, Now, he could have been right, I don't know. Now I want to look at Philip's, because Philip takes a little different slant on it, but I like plutocrats. Now, this is almost a direct translation of the Greek word. Plutos means riches in Greek. Okay, so you plutocrats, that is people who have cost us power over money. Money is power. It's time for you to weep and moan because of misery in store. Now notice, I love the way he talks about tarnish here instead of rust. Now the word actually in the original means rust, but tarnish is the same thing, I suppose. You've made a fine pile into these last days, haven't you? See, they're storing up for the last days, so everything's going to be great for us. But what you've done, you've had a great time on the earth. And notice the figure of speech here about picking out like looting soldiers. And you have condemned and ruined innocent men, and they have been powerless to stop you. So you got to feel pretty strong about yourself when you're in this situation. So James has a true prophetic denunciation, you see, of this kind of greedy grasping. You say, well, thank goodness that doesn't go on in our world today, and that's not a problem for us at all. Well, it could be. It could be. Now, there is thievery that goes on that's pretty obvious, right? If you walk home after church and you see a guy who looks something like this, odds are he's not there to exterminate the bugs, in your house or to dust your furniture. You might even have a bad feeling about this sort of person. And you say, well, that's pretty obvious that he's not really a skier, I don't think, from the Olympics who got loose and lost. He's here to steal something. These kind of people are not that obvious. It's not that you're going to really think they're just like mafia types. It's going to be done in a way, and the thing is that James is concerned about, I think, it may be done in a way in which you actually cooperate in some way, or some maybe otherwise good people will cooperate. Now, you see a guy like this, you don't know whether he's a crook or not. So what do you think? He's not going to date my daughter, is probably the first thing you think, and rightly so. But this is what some of you looked like a few years ago, and you've turned out pretty well. So this may be a good guy, On the other hand, somebody may be really dressed up and look great, but there's something about them. And everybody recognizes W.C. Fields here. And W.C. Fields, had this little saying, "Go away, boys, you bother me," and all that. And he played this kind of Monopoly type crook, He looked great, but he really... W.C. Fields had a real problem with alcohol. In fact, he said one time, "I always carry a little spirits with me, just in case I get bitten by a snake. And in my other pocket, I also carry a small snake." Played the part of the rich guy who really was going to do you in because of greed. And sometimes, we get involved in these things, this greed thing, because it takes a lot of forms and you can get caught up in it. Sometimes it even seems, I've heard perceived, like the whole world's for sale. It's just like everything's so commercial. Christmas, oh yes. Oh yeah, well, we wouldn't know how to survive Christmas without. I had a lot of Japanese students. They said, "Christmas very big in Japan." I said, "Well, tell me about it. Do you celebrate the birth of Jesus?" "Oh, no, we don't know about that, but we sure buy and sell a lot of stuff." So, Christmas is totally a commercial holiday in Japan. It has nothing to do with the nativity. And so that's kind of like you want to go and experience it at its most commercial. Sometimes we forget the finer things when we think everything or everybody is for sale. We buy into the attitude of the world. I've heard a lot of Christians even, very cynical. Aren't too many good people out there. Everybody's for sale at some point. Just have to find their price. And they'll tell me the story about George Bernard Shaw and this fabulous lady. You've heard this story, I'm sure. That, I don't know if it's Lady Astor or one of those high, mighty. And she was having a discussion with him, and he said, "Lady Astor, would you sleep me for $100? Absolutely not. What do you think I am?" "Well, would you sleep with me for $1 million? "Yes, I think I would, even you." And she said, "But on the other hand, what do you think I am?" She said, "Oh, we already know what you are. We're just haggling about the price now." That's what people do, you see. So money, 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 that's what it's all about. And we do pay a lot of credit to this because we think if they got the money, that gives them their credentials and it gives them their identity. So we kind of go along with that a little bit by showing a lot of respect for people who have the bucks, you see. And because of that, you read this over and over and over again about people being approached, and because of their own somehow deep belief that there really is a Nigerian prince who wants to give them millions of dollars, All they have to do is to show their sincerity by sending a certain amount of money. And there's enough of that greed in all of us to sort of really want to believe that. And so we become prisoners of our own deceit that way. It happens all the time, unfortunately. And you can say to people, well, don't ever, but it's so strong. And not only that, but even in the innocence of using your credit or debit card, this looks perfectly legitimate, but that actually is not a real credit card receipt. That is a skimmer. And a skimmer you can hardly detect. And the skimmer will take care of your account for you and get all your information so that you'll be taken in like the poor folks that use the Target card. So it is a difficult world, you see. And there's a lot of greedy people. And sometimes you think they believe they can control the world. They can get it in their grasp, you see. And one of the things going on right now, and I just point this out to you just as a kind of, for whatever you want to think about it, it's a phenomenon known as land grabbing. And this is mostly going on in the undeveloped countries of the world, but here's from a conference paper that just came out in September 2013 at Yale University by a very reputable group. It seems as if a few years ago, there was in the third world a huge emergency about food. And the price of rice, for example, went up tremendously in places like Malaysia and Indonesia and in Africa. And so there were a lot of really wealthy countries that became very concerned about that, one of which was Saudi Arabia. There are others that I can mention. And so what they decided to do was to take the money they had, and they had plenty of money, and to go to countries where the government really wasn't all that strong, was open to being bribed, greedy officials. And they began acquiring land, and in the process dispossessing the people that lived on it. And they were going to, as the report says, large-scale land acquisitions. And they've caused protests, riots, coup, other conflict from Mali to Madagascar. But the thing is, when they go in there and they establish these huge farms, they don't raise a single ear of corn for the local population. It all goes back to Saudi Arabia or these other countries. And it's at the point now, you see, where it's alarming people at a very, very, very high level. They're buying up land and dispossessing farmers, much like James would say was going on in Palestine at the time, to the hurt of poor people. So we have people virtually selling things right out from under you. Okay. So how'd you like it today if you're driving across the bridge over here, say, to Madison, and suddenly you see there's a toll because the greedy graspers have bought it up. You say, well, we wouldn't tolerate that here. But that's essentially what's happening, you see, to people in poorer countries. They're being sold, the land's being sold right out from under them. And there's a story in a book called The Land Grabbers, which you could look at. I've read some of it. I don't know how accurate it all is, but it's an on-the-scene report. And the man goes to Ethiopia, and he interviews people, and they're all sitting around doing nothing. They were farmers. They have all been dispossessed by the Ethiopian government. And there's nothing to do but sit on the porch. And they're going to ship them away to some almost like concentration camp to live in, and take them out of the villages they've lived in for centuries and centuries, and take them off the land. And so they're displacing these farmers. And the thing is, there isn't any local food production, so now they become victims of the system and have to buy it through the system itself. And these poor guys then have to go into the wage economy and try to find a job in a land where there are no jobs. So that's going on in our world today. I just point this out as an example of some of the things people are doing in our world today. And if you talk to them, they say, well, we're not evil at all. We just simply want to secure food for our own people in the future. We're just making good plans, but at the cost of hurting others. So that's kind of what James, I think, is getting at. And revolutionary as it is, we all know the bottom line is who's really going to get hurt are the kids. The kids are going to get hurt. So you say, well, what can we do about that, Bob? We live in a world that's out of control. I don't have any power over Saudi Arabia. I write a letter to the editor if you want me to, but I don't know what good. You know what it is? I think we all need just to be informed sometimes, just to know what's going on in our world, and to be people who stand for what's right and do what we can, where we can, and when we can. But what James is really doing, he's just leaving it up to the Lord in a sense. Not that he's passive or anything, but he can't lead a revolution. But these things should concern us, I think, as they concern James, because people are being hurt in our world by greed. But for the greedy, James says, this thing's really a landmine, and it was. It's a landmine, and you're going to step on it. And going this way is a very, very strong trap, because you're going to find out, he says, that instead of security, you have really made your future very dangerous indeed. And he has this image, let's go back before I put my friend up here, of gold burning like a fire. Well, is there any help for this? Well, yes, I bring in my helper dog. This is a dog that lives only in Argentina, and it's called a doggo, D-O-G-O, okay. It's a doggo. Doggos are very, very expensive down there, but they're very helpful, I understand. So I don't want to bring one up here. I just put this up here because he reminded me of a Jedi. Help you I can. I think James says, I can help you. What you have to do is recover a sense of justice. See, one thing all this evil does to us sometimes, it just paralyzes us, and we just get numb. And then the only thing we can think of is entertainment and pleasing ourselves, because it's just too painful to think otherwise. But to arouse the consciousness of a people so that they will be adventurers for the Lord, will see better things for people. And like this woman who's in China. Now, she didn't have to go to China. Christy didn't have to go to the Czech Republic. Others didn't have to go to Guatemala. They didn't have to run those risks in Africa. But why? Because they've caught a little bit of what James is talking about here, a vision of God and God's burning desire for people who are in need. And rather than being part of the exploiting system, we want to be part of those who adventure for God. Here's a young woman you may know, you may not know. A woman who had a spirit of adventure about her. And so she got into and people said to her, you will never make it. And she went into the NASA program and became an astronaut. And in fact, became the first mother to fly in space. The only reason that happened is she would not give up on her dream. And I don't think James is going to give up on his dream of a world in which things are done right, when people are helped. And maybe that's why the Lord says, as the passage Russ looked at today, whoever gives even a cup of water, that's not much. But it's a whole lot better than just being cynical and withdrawn and not caring. So if nothing else, James is trying to arouse our kind. We do live in an evil world, but God will take care of all that eventually, but still, let's do what we can. And so I love the words that Micah has, and you're all very familiar with this, but it's quite a simple thing, isn't it, when you think about it? What can I do about all this? Well, let's do what's right, let's love what's kind, and let's just walk humbly with our God. And I think in that way we will serve in powerful ways and maybe arrive, let's somehow pick the consciousness of the world and be able to do good in various places. And that one single good you do could be very, very powerful indeed. Don't give up on your dreams then, because this is a tough world where money seems to be God and king. But like all false gods, it will crumble and fall into the dust. And what you've done for God will stand forever. Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for being here.